5. The Letter of Advice. "Do you know, Austin," said VA as the two friends were pacing sedately along Piccadilly one pleasant morning in May, "do you know I am convinced that what you told me about Paul Street and the Herberts is a mere episode in an extraordinary history? I may as well confess to you that when I asked you about Herbert a few months ago, I had just seen him." "You had seen him? Where?" "He begged of me in the street one night. He was the most pitiable plight, but I recognized the man, and I got him to tell me his history, or at least the outline of it. In brief, it amounted to this: he had been ruined by his wife." "In what manner?" "He would not tell me. He would only say that she had destroyed him, body and soul. The man is dead now."
And what has become of his wife?
"Ah, that's what I should like to know, and I mean to find her sooner or later. I know a man named Clark, a dry fellow, in fact, a man of business, but shrewd enough. You understand my meaning, not shrewd in the mere business sense of the word, but a man who really knows something about men and life. Well, I laid the case before him, and he was evidently impressed. He said that he needed consideration, and asked me to come again in the course of a week. A few days later, I received this extraordinary letter." Austin took the envelope, drew out the letter, and read it curiously. It ran as follows: "My dear VA, I have thought over the matter on which you consulted me the other night, and my advice to you is this: throw the portrait into the fire, blot out the story from your mind. Never give it another thought, VA, or you will be sorry. You will think, no doubt, that I am in possession of some secret information, and to a certain extent that is the case, but I only know a little. I am like a traveler who has peered over an abyss and has drawn back in terror. What I know is strange enough and horrible enough. Beyond my knowledge, there are depths and horrors more frightful still, more incredible than any tale told of winter nights about the fire. I have resolved, and nothing shall shake that resolve, to explore no whit farther, and if you value your happiness, you will make the same determination. Come here to see me by all means, but we will talk on more cheerful topics than this." Austin folded the letter methodically and returned it to VA. "It is certainly an extraordinary letter," he said. "What does he mean by the portrait?" "Ah, I forgot to tell you I have been to Paul Street, and have made a discovery." VA told his story as he had told it to Clark, and Austin listened in silence. He seemed puzzled. "How very curious that you should experience such an unpleasant sensation in that room," he said at length. "I hardly gather that it was a mere matter of the imagination, a feeling of repulsion, in short." "No, it was more physical than mental. It was as if I were inhaling at every breath some deadly fume, which seemed to penetrate to every nerve and bone and sinew of my body. I felt racked from head to foot. My eyes began to grow dim. It was like the entrance of death." "Yes, yes, very strange, certainly. You see, your friend confesses there is some very black story connected with this woman. Did you notice any particular emotion in him when you were telling your tale?" "Yes, I did. He became very faint, but he assured me that it was a mere passing attack to which he was subject." "Did you believe him?" "I did at the time, but I don't now. He heard what I had to say with a good deal of indifference till I showed him the portrait. It was then that he was seized with the attack of which I spoke. He looked ghastly, I assure you." "Then he must have seen the woman before, but there might be another explanation. It might have been the name and not the face, which was familiar to him. What do you think?" "I couldn't say. To the best of my belief, it was after turning the portrait in his hands that he nearly dropped from the chair. The name, you know, was written on the back." "Quite so. After all, it is impossible to come to any resolution in a case like this. I hate melodrama, and nothing strikes me as more commonplace and tedious than the ordinary ghost story of commerce. But really, VA, it looks as if there were something very queer at the bottom of all this." The two men had, without noticing it, turned up Ashley Street, leading northward from Piccadilly. It was a long street and rather a gloomy one, but here and there a brighter taste had illuminated the dark houses with flowers and gay curtains and a cheerful paint on the door. VA glanced up as Austin stopped speaking, and looked at one of these houses. Geraniums, red and white, drooped from every sill, and daffodil colored curtains were draped back from each window. It looks cheerful, doesn't it? He said. Yes, and the inside is still more cheery. One of the pleasantest houses of the season, so I have heard. I haven't been there myself, but I've met several men who have, and they tell me it's uncommonly jovial. Whose house is it? Mrs. Beaumont's. And who is she? I couldn't tell you. I have heard she comes from South America, but after all, who she is of little consequence. She is a very wealthy woman, there's no doubt of that, and some of the best people have taken her up. I hear she has some wonderful claret, really marvelous wine, which must have cost a fabulous sum. Lord Argentine was telling me about it. He was there last Sunday evening. He assures me he has never tasted such a wine, and Argentine, as you know, is an expert. By the way, that reminds me, she must be an oddish sort of woman, this Mrs. Beaumont. Argentine asked her how old the wine was, and what do you think she said? About 1,000 years, I believe. Lord Argentine thought she was chaffing him, you know, but when he laughed, she said she was speaking quite seriously and offered to show him the jar. Of course, he couldn't say anything more after that, but it seems rather antiquated for a beverage, doesn't it? Why, here we are at my rooms. Come in, won't you? Thanks, I think I will. I haven't seen the curiosity shop for a while. It was a room furnished richly, yet oddly, where every jar and bookcase and table and every rug and jar and ornament seemed to be a thing apart, preserving each its own individuality. Anything fresh lately? Said VA after a while. No, I think not. You saw those queer jugs, didn't you? I thought so. I don't think I've come across anything for the last few weeks. Austin glanced around the room from cupboard to cupboard, from shelf to shelf in search of some new oddity. His eyes fell at last as on an odd chest, pleasantly and quaintly carved, which stood in a dark corner of the room. Ah, he said, I was forgetting. I have got something to show you. Austin unlocked the chest, drew out a thick quarto volume, laid it on the table, and resumed the cigar he had put down. Did you know Arthur Merrick, the painter, V.A.? A little. I met him 2 or 3 times at the house of a friend of mine. What has become of him? I haven't heard his name mentioned for some time. He's dead. You don't say. Quite young, wasn't he? Yes, only 30 when he died. What did he die of? I don't know. He was an intimate friend of mine and a thoroughly good fellow. He used to come here and talk to me for hours, and he was one of the best talkers I have met. He could even talk about painting, and that's more than can be said of most painters. About 18 months ago, he was feeling rather overworked, and partly at my suggestion, he went off on a sort of roving expedition with no very definite end or aim about it. I believe New York was to be his first port, but I never heard from him. 3 months ago, I got this book, the very civil letter from an English doctor practicing at Buenos Aires, stating that he had attended the late Mr. Merrick during his illness, and that the deceased had expressed an earnest wish that the enclosed package should be sent to me after his death. That was all. And haven't you written for further particulars? I have been thinking of doing so. You would advise me to write to the doctor? Certainly. And what about the book? It was sealed up when I got it. I don't think the doctor has seen it. It is something very rare. Merrick was a collector, perhaps? No, I think not. Hardly a collector. No, what do you think of these Ainu jugs? They are peculiar, but I like them. But aren't you going to show me Mr. Poor Merrick's legacy? Oh, yes, yes, to be sure. The fact is, it's rather a peculiar sort of thing, and I haven't shown it to anyone. I wouldn't say anything about it if it were you. There it is. VA took the book and opened it haphazard. It isn't a printed volume, then, he said. No, it's a collection of drawings in black and white by my poor friend Merrick. VA turned to the first page. It was blank. The second bore a brief inscription which he read: Sile per diem universis, nec sine horror secretis es, lucic nocturnus ignibus choris, agapunum indique personator, audentor e cantis tibarium e tenitis, symbolorum per orum meritamum. On the third page was a design which made VA start and look up at Austin. He was gazing abstractedly out of the window. VA turned page after page, absorbed in spite of himself in the frightful Walpurgis night of evil, strange, monstrous evil,
that the dead artist had set forth in hard black and white. The figures of fauns and satyrs and acapans dancing before his eyes, the darkness of the thicket, the dance on the mountain top, the scenes by lonely shores and green vineyards, by rocks and desert places, passed before him, a world before which the human soul seemed to shrink back and shudder. VA whirled over the remaining pages. He had seen enough, but the picture on the last leaf caught his eye as he almost closed the book. Austin! Well, what is it? Do you know who that is? It was a woman's face, alone on the white page. Know who it is? No, of course not.
I do.
Who is it?
It is Mrs. Herbert.
Are you sure?
I am perfectly sure of it. Poor Merrick. He is one more chapter in her history.
But what do you think of the designs?
They are frightful. Lock the book up again, Austin. If I were you, I'd burn it. It must be a terrible companion, even though it be in a chest.
Yes, they are singular drawings, but I wonder what connection there could be between Merrick and Mrs. Herbert, or what link between her and these designs.
Ah, who can say? It is possible that the matter may end here and we shall never know. But in my own opinion, this Helen Vaughan or Mrs. Herbert is only the beginning. She will come back to London, Austin. Depend on it. She will come back and we shall hear more about her then. I doubt it will be very pleasant news.
6. The Suicides.
Lord Argentine was a great favorite in London society. At 20, he had been a poor man, decked with the surname of an illustrious family, but forced to earn a livelihood as best he could. And the most speculative of moneylenders would not have entrusted him with £50 on the chance of his ever changing his name for a title and his poverty for a great fortune. His father had been near enough to the fountain of good things to secure one of the family livings, but the son, even if he had taken orders, would scarcely have obtained so much as this, and moreover felt no vocation for the ecclesiastical estate. Thus he fronted the world with no better armor than the bachelor's gown and the wits of a younger son's grandson, with which equipment he contrived in some ways to make a very tolerable fight of it. At 25, Mr. Charles Aubernon saw himself still a man of struggles and of warfare with the world, but out of the 7 who had stood before him in the high places of his family, 3 only remained. These 3, however, were good lives, but yet not proof against the Zulu azaga and typhoid fever. And so one morning Aubernon woke up and found himself Lord Argentine, a man of 30 who had faced the difficulties of existence and had conquered. The situation amused him immensely, and resolved that riches should be as pleasant to him as poverty had always been. Argentine, after some little consideration, came to the conclusion that dining, regarding as a fine art, was perhaps the most amusing pursuit open to fallen humanity, and thus his dinners became famous in London, and an invitation to his table a thing covetously desired. After 10 years of lordship and dinners, Argentine still declined to be jaded, still persisted in enjoying life, and by a kind of infection had become recognized as a cause of joy in others. In short, as the best of company. His sudden and tragical death therefore caused a wide and deep sensation. People could scarcely believe it, even though the newspaper was before their eyes and the cry of mysterious death of a nobleman came ringing up from the street. But there stood the brief paragraph. Lord Argentine was found dead this morning by his valet under distressing circumstances. It is stated that there can be no doubt that his lordship committed suicide, though no motive can be assigned for the act. The deceased nobleman was widely known in society and much liked for his genial manner and sumptuous hospitality. He is succeeded by, etc., etc. By slow degrees, the details came to light, but the case still remained a mystery. The chief witness at the inquest was the deceased valet, who said that the night before his death Lord Argentine had dined with a lady of good position, whose name was suppressed in the newspaper reports. At about 11 o'clock, Lord Argentine had returned and informed his man that he should not require his services till the next morning. A little later, the valet had occasion to cross the hall and was somewhat astonished to see his master,
quietly letting himself out at the front door. He had taken off his evening clothes and was dressed in a Norfolk coat and knickerbockers, and wore a low brown hat. The valet had no reason to suppose that Lord Argentine had seen him, and though his master rarely kept late hours, thought little of the occurrence till the next morning, when he knocked at the bedroom door at 8:45 as usual. He received no answer, and after knocking 2 or 3 times, entered the room and saw Lord Argentine's body leaning forward at an angle from the bottom of the bed. He found that his master had tied a cord securely to one of the short bedposts, and after making a running noose and slipping it round his neck, the unfortunate man must have resolutely fallen forward, to die by slow strangulation. He was dressed in the light suit in which the valet had seen him go out, and the doctor who was summoned pronounced that life had been extinct for more than 4 hours. All papers, letters, and so forth seemed in perfect order, and nothing was discovered which pointed in the most remote way to any scandal, either great or small. Here the evidence ended, nothing more could be discovered. Several persons had been present at the dinner party at which Lord Argentine had assisted, and to all these he seemed in his usual genial spirits. The valet, indeed, said he thought his master appeared a little excited when he came home, but confessed that the alteration in his manner was very slight, hardly noticeable indeed. It seemed hopeless to seek for any clue, and the suggestion that Lord Argentine had been suddenly attacked by acute suicidal mania was generally accepted. It was otherwise, however, when within 3 weeks 3 more gentlemen, one of them a nobleman and 2 others men of good position and ample means, perished miserably in the almost precisely the same manner. Lord Swanley was found one morning in his dressing room, hanging from a peg affixed to the wall, and Mr. Collier Stewart and Mr. Herries had chosen to die as Lord Argentine. There is no explanation in either case, a few bald facts, a living man in the evening, and a body with a black swollen face in the morning. The police had been forced to confess themselves powerless to arrest or to explain the sordid murders of Whitechapel, but before the horrible suicides of Piccadilly and Mayfair they were dumbfounded, for not even the mere ferocity which did duty as an explanation of the crimes of the East End could be of service in the West. Each of these men who had resolved to die a tortured, shameful death was rich, prosperous, and to all appearances in love with the world, and not the acutest research should ferret out any shadow of a lurking motive in either case. There was a horror in the air, and men looked at one another's faces when they met, each wondering whether the other was to be the victim of the fifth nameless tragedy. Journalists sought in vain for their scrapbooks for materials whereof to concoct reminiscent articles, and the morning paper was unfolded in many a house with a feeling of awe. No man knew when or where the next blow would light. A short while after the last of these terrible events, Austin came to see Mr. Va. He was curious to know whether Va had succeeded in discovering any fresh traces of Mrs. Herbert, either through Clark or by other sources, and he asked the question soon after he had sat down. "No," said V.A. "I wrote to Clark, but he remains obdurate. I have tried other channels, but without any result. I can't find out what became of Helen Vaughan after she left Paul Street, but I think she must have gone abroad. But to tell the truth, Austin, I haven't paid much attention to the matter for the last few weeks. I knew poor Harry's intimately, and his terrible death has been a great shock to me. A great shock."
I can well believe, answered Austin gravely. You know Argentine was a friend of mine. If I remember rightly, we were speaking of him that day you came to my rooms.
"Yes, it was in connection with that house on Ashley Street, Mrs. Beaumont's house. You said something about Argentines dining there."
Quite so. Of course you know it was there Argentine dined the night before his death.
"No, I had not heard that."
Oh, yes, the name was kept out of the papers to spare Mrs. Beaumont. Argentine was a great favorite of hers, and it is said that she was in a terrible state for some time after.
A curious look came over V.A.'s face. He seemed undecided whether to speak or not. Austin began again.
I never experienced such a feeling of horror as when I read the account of Argentine's death. I didn't understand it at the time, and I don't now. I knew him well, and it was completely passes my understanding for what possibly caused his, or any of the others for the matter of that, could have resolved in cold blood to die in such an awful manner. You know how men babble away each other's characters in London. You may be sure any buried scandal or hidden skeleton would have been brought to light in such a case as this, but nothing of the sort has taken place. As for the theory of mania, that is very well, of course, for the coroner's jury, but everybody knows that it's all nonsense. Suicidal mania is not smallpox. Austin relapsed into gloomy silence. VA sat silent, also watching his friend. The expression of indecision still fleeted across his face. He seemed as if weighing his thoughts in the balance, and the considerations he was resolving left him still silent. Austin tried to shake off the remembrance of tragedies as hopeless and perplexed as a labyrinth of Daedalus, and began to talk in an indifferent voice of the more pleasant incidents and adventures of the season. That Miss Beaumont, he said, of whom we were speaking, is a great success. She's taken London almost by storm. I met her the other night at Fulham's. She really is a remarkable woman.
You've met Mrs. Beaumont?
Yes, she had quite a court around her. She would be called very handsome, I suppose, and yet there is something about her face which I didn't like. The features are exquisite, but the expression is strange. And all the time I was looking at her, and afterwards, when I was going home, I had a curious feeling that very expression was in some way or another familiar to me.
You must have seen her in the Row.
No, I'm sure I have never set eyes on the woman before. It is that which makes it puzzling, and to the best of my belief, I have never seen anyone like her. What I felt was a kind of dim, far off memory, vague but persistent. The only sensation I can compare it to is that odd feeling one sometimes has in a dream when fantastic cities and wondrous lands and phantom personages appear familiar and unaccustomed. VA nodded and glanced aimlessly around the room, possibly in search of something on which to turn the conversation. His eyes fell on an old chest, somewhat like that in which the artist's strange legacy lay, hid beneath a Gothic scutcheon.
Have you written to the doctor about poor Merrick?
He asked. Yes, I wrote asking for full particulars as to his illness and death. I don't expect to have an answer for another 3 weeks or a month. I thought I might as well inquire whether Merrick knew an English woman named Herbert, and if so, whether the doctor could give me any information about her. But it's very possible that Merrick fell in with her at New York or Mexico or San Francisco. I have no idea as to the extent or direction of his travels.
Yes, and it's very possible that the woman may have more than one name.
Exactly. I wish I had thought of asking you to lend me the portrait of her which you possess. I might have enclosed it in my letter to Dr. Matthews.
Huh, so you might. That never occurred to me. We might send it now. Hark! What are those boys calling?
While the two men had been talking together, a confused noise of shouting had been gradually growing louder. The noise rose from the eastward and swelled down Piccadilly, drawing nearer and nearer, a very torrent of sound, surging up streets usually quiet, and making every window a frame for a face, curious or excited. The cries and voices came echoing up the silent streets where VA lived, growing more distinct as they advanced, and as VA spoke, an answer rang up from the pavement. The West End horrors! Another awful suicide! Full details! Austin rushed down the stairs and bought a paper and read out the paragraph to VA as the uproar in the street rose and fell. The window was open, and the air seemed full of noise and terror. Another gentleman has fallen to victim to the terrible epidemic of suicide which for the last month has prevailed in the West End. Mr. Sidney Croshaw of Stoke House, Fulham, and King's Pomeroy, Devon, was found, after a prolonged search, hanging dead from the branch of a tree in his garden at 1 o'clock today. The deceased gentleman dined last night at the Carlton Club, and seemed in his usual health and spirits. He left the club at about 10 o'clock, and was seen walking leisurely up St. James Street a little later. Subsequent to this, his movements cannot be traced. On the discovery of the body, medical aid was at once summoned, but life had evidently been long extinct. So far as is known, Mr. Croshaw had no trouble or anxiety of any kind. This painful suicide, it'll be remembered, is the fifth of the kind in this last month. The authorities at Scotland Yard are unable to suggest any explanation of these terrible occurrences. Austin put down the paper in mute horror. I shall leave London tomorrow, he said. It is a city of nightmares. How awful this is, VA. Mr. VA was sitting by the window, quietly looking out into the street. He had listened to the newspaper report attentively, and the hint of indecision was no longer on his face.
Wait a moment, Austin, he replied. I've made up my mind to mention a little matter that occurred last night.
It's stated, I think, that Crawshaw was last seen alive in St. James Street shortly after 10.
Yes, I think so. I will look again. Yes, you are quite right.
Quite so. Well, I'm in position to contradict that statement at all events. Crawshaw was seen after that, considerably later indeed,
How do you know?
because I happened to see Crawshaw myself at about 2 o'clock this morning.
You saw Crawshaw? You, VA?
Yes, I saw him quite distinctly indeed. There were but a few feet between us.
Where in heaven's name did you see him?
Not far from here. I saw him in Ashley Street. He was just leaving a house.
Did you notice what house it was?
Yes, it was Mrs. Beaumont's.
VA! Think what you are saying. There must be some mistake. How could Crawshaw be in Mrs. Beaumont's house at 2 o'clock in the morning? Sure, you must have been dreaming, VA. You were always rather fanciful.
No, I was wide awake enough. Even if I had been dreaming, as you say, what I saw would have roused me effectually.
What you saw? What did you see? Was there anything strange about Crawshaw? But I can't believe it. It is impossible.
Well, if you think like I will tell you what I saw, or if you please, what I think I saw, and you can judge for yourself.
Very good, VA.
The noise and clamor of the street had died away, though now and then the sound of shouting still came from the distance, and the dull laden silence seemed like the quiet after an earthquake or a storm. VA turned from the window and began to speak. I was at a house near Regent's Park last night, and when I came away the fancy took me to walk home instead of taking a hansom. It was a clear, pleasant night enough, and after a few minutes I had the streets pretty much to myself. It was a curious thing, Austin, to be alone in London at night. The gas lamp stretching away in perspective, and the dead silence, and then perhaps the rush and clatter of a hansom on the stones, and the fire starting up under the horses' hooves. I walked along pretty briskly, for I was feeling a little tired of being out in the night, and as the clocks were striking 2, I turned down Ashley Street, which you know is on my way. It was quieter than ever there, and the lamps were fewer. Altogether it looked as dark and gloomy as a forest in winter. I had done about half the length of the street when I heard a door close very softly, and naturally I looked up to see who was abroad like myself at such an hour. As it happens, there is a street lamp close to the house in question, and I saw a man standing on the step. He had just shut the door, and his face was towards me, and I recognized Crawshaw directly. I never knew him to speak to, but I had often seen him, and I am positive that I was not mistaken in my man. I looked into his face for a moment, and then, I will confess the truth, I set off at a good run and kept it up till I was within my own door.
Why?
Why? Because it made my blood run cold to see that man's face. I could never have supposed that such an infernal medley of passions could have glared out of any human eyes. I almost fainted as I looked. I knew I had looked into the eyes of a lost soul, Austin. The man's outward form remained, but all hell was within it. Furious lust and hate that was like fire, and the loss of all hope and horror that seemed to shriek aloud to the night, though his teeth were shut, and the utter blackness of despair. I am sure that he did not see me. He saw nothing that you or I can see, but what he saw I hope we never shall. I do not know when he died. I suppose in an hour, perhaps 2, but when I passed down Ashley Street and heard the closing door, that man was no longer belonged to this world. It was a devil's face I looked upon.
There was an interval of silence in the room when VA ceased speaking. The light was failing, and all the tumult of an hour ago was quite hushed. Austin had bent his head at the close of the story, and his hand covered his eyes. What can it mean? He said at length.
Who knows, Austin? Who knows? It's a black business, but I think we had better keep it to ourselves, for the present at any rate. I will see if I cannot learn anything about that house through private channels of information, and if I do light upon anything, I will let you know. 7. The Encounter in Soho. 3 weeks later, Austin received a note from VA asking him to call either that afternoon or the next. He chose a nearer date and found VA sitting as usual by the window, apparently lost in meditation on the drowsy traffic of the street. There was a bamboo table by his side, a fantastic thing, enriched with gilding and queer painted scenes, and on it lay a little pile of papers arranged and docketed as neatly as anything in Mr. Clark's office.
Well, VA, have you made any discoveries in the last 3 weeks?
I think so. I have here one or two memoranda which struck me as singular, and there is a statement in which I shall call your attention.
And these documents relate to Mrs. Beaumont. It was really Crawshaw whom you saw that night standing in the doorstep of the house in Ashley Street?
As to that matter, my belief remains unchanged, but neither my inquiries nor their results have any special relation to Crawshaw. But my investigation have had a strange issue. I have found out who Mrs. Beaumont is.
Who is she? In what way do you mean?
I mean that you and I know her better under another name.
What name is that?
Herbert.
Herbert?
Austin repeated the word, dazed with astonishment. Yes, Mrs. Herbert of Paul Street, Helen Vaughan of earlier adventures unknown to me. You had reason to recognize the expression of her face when you go home. Look at the face in Merrick's book of horrors, and you will know the source of your recollection.
And you have proof of this?
Yes, the best of proof. I have seen Mrs. Beaumont, or shall we say Mrs. Herbert.
Where did you see her?
Hardly in a place where you would expect to see a lady who lives in Ashley Street, Piccadilly. I saw her entering a house in one of the meanest and most disreputable streets in Soho. In fact, I had made an appointment, though not with her, and she was precise to both time and place.
All this seems very wonderful, but I cannot call it incredible. You must remember, VA, that I have seen this woman in the ordinary adventure of London society talking and laughing and sipping her coffee in a commonplace drawing room with commonplace people. But you know what you are saying.
I do. I have not allowed myself to be led by surmises or fancies. It was with no thought of finding Helen Vaughan that I searched for Mrs. Beaumont in the dark waters of the life of London, but such has been the issue.
You must have been in strange places, VA.
Yes, I have been in very strange places. It would have been useless, you know, to go to Ashley Street and ask Mrs. Beaumont to give me a short sketch of her previous history. No, assuming as I had to assume that her record was not of the cleanest, it would be pretty certain that at some previous time she must have moved in circles not quite so refined as her present ones. If you see mud at the top of a stream, you may be sure that it once at the bottom. I went to the bottom. I've always been fond of diving into Queer Street for my amusement, and I found my knowledge of that locality and its inhabitants very useful. It is perhaps needless to say that my friends have never heard the name of Beaumont, and as I had never seen the lady and was quite unable to describe her, I had to set to work in an indirect way. The people there know me. I've been able to do some of them a service now and again, so they made no difficulty about giving their information. They were aware I had no communication, direct or indirect, with Scotland Yard. I had to cast out a good many lines, though, before I got what I wanted, and when I landed the fish, I did not for a moment suppose it was my fish. But I listened to what I was told out of a constitutional liking for useless information, and I found myself in possession of a very curious story, though as I imagine, not the story I was looking for. It was to this effect. Some 5 or 6 years ago, a woman named Raymond suddenly made her appearance in the neighborhood to which I am referring. She was described to me as being quite young, probably not more than 17 or 18, very handsome, and looking as if she came from the country. I should be wrong in saying that she found her level in going to this particular quarter or associating with these people, for from what I was told, I should think the worst din in London far too good for her. The person from whom I got my information, as you may suppose, no great Puritan, shuddered and grew sick in telling me of the nameless infamies which were laid to her discharge. After living there for a year, or perhaps a little more, she disappeared as suddenly as she came, and they saw nothing of her till about the time of the Paul Street case. At first she came to her old haunts only occasionally, then more frequently, and finally took up her abode there as before, and remained for 6 or 8 months. It's of no use my going into details as to the life that woman led. If you want particulars, you can look at Merrick's legacy. Those designs were not drawn from his imagination. She again disappeared, and the people of the place saw nothing of her till a few months ago. My informant told me that she had taken some rooms in a house which he pointed out, and these rooms she was in the habit of visiting 2 or 3 times a week, and always at 10 in the morning. I was led to expect that one of these visits would be paid on a certain day about a week ago, and I accordingly managed to be on the lookout in the company with my cicerone at 9:45, and the hour and the lady came with equal punctuality. My friend and I were standing under an archway a little way back from the street, but she saw us and gave me a glance that I shall be long in forgetting. That look was quite enough for me. I knew Miss Raymond to be Mrs. Herbert. As for Mrs. Beaumont, she had quite gone out of my head. She went into the house, and I watched it till 4 o'clock, when she came out, and then I followed her. It was a long chase, and I had to be very careful to keep a long way in the background, and yet not lose sight of the woman. She took me down to the Strand, and then to Westminster, and then up St. James Street and along Piccadilly. I felt queerish when I saw her turn up Ashley Street. The thought that Mrs. Herbert was Mrs. Beaumont came into my mind, but it seemed too impossible to be true. I waited at the corner, keeping my eye on her all the time, and I took particular care to note the house at which she stopped. It was the house with the gay curtains, the home of flowers, the house out of which Crushall came the night he hanged himself in his garden. I was just going away with my discovery when I saw an empty carriage come round and draw up in front of the house, and I came to the conclusion that Mrs. Herbert was going out for a drive, and I was right. There, as it happened, I met a man I know, and we stood talking together a little distance from the carriageway to which I had my back. We had not been there for 10 minutes when my friend took off his hat, and I glanced round and saw the lady I'd been following all day. "Who is that?" I said, and his answer was, "Mrs. Beaumont, lives in Ashley Street." Of course, there could be no doubt after that. I don't know whether she saw me, but I don't think she did. I went home at once, and on consideration, I thought that I had a sufficiently good case from which to go to Clark.
Why to Clark?
Because I am sure that Clark is in possession of facts about this woman, facts of which I know nothing.
Well, what then?
Mr. Vier leaned back in his chair and looked reflectively at Austin for a moment before he answered. My idea was that Clark and I should call on Mrs. Beaumont.
You would never go into such a house as that. No, no, VA, you cannot do it. Besides, consider what result.
I will tell you soon, but I was going to say that my information does not end here. It has been completed in an extraordinary manner. Look at this neat little packet of manuscript. It is paginated, you see, and I have indulged in the civil coquetry of a ribbon of red tape. It is almost a legal air, hasn't it? Run your eye over it, Austin. It is an account of the entertainment Mrs. Beaumont provided for her choisier guest. The man who wrote this escaped with his life, but I do not think he will live many years. The doctors tell him he must have sustained some severe shock to the nerves.
Austin took the manuscript but never read it. Opening the neat pages at haphazard, his eyes was caught by a word and a phrase that followed it, and sick at heart, with white lips and a cold sweat pouring like water from his temples, he flung the papers down. Take it away, VA. Never speak of this again. Are you made of stone, man? Why the dread and horror of death itself, the thoughts of the man who stands in the keen morning air on the black platform, bound, the bell tolling in his ears, and waits for the harsh rattle of the bolt, are as nothing compared to this. I will not read it. I shall never sleep again.
Very good, and I can fancy what you saw. Yes, it is horrible enough, but after all, it is an old story, an old mystery played in our day, in dim London streets instead of amidst the vineyards and the olive gardens. We know what happened to those who chanced to meet the great god Pan, and those who are wise know that all symbols are symbols of something, not of nothing. It was indeed an exquisite symbol beneath which men long ago veiled their knowledge of the most awful, most secret forces which lie at the heart of all things, forces before which the souls of men must wither and die and blacken, as their bodies blacken under the electric current. Such forces cannot be named, cannot be spoken, cannot be imagined except under a veil and a symbol to most of us appearing a quaint, poetic fancy, to some a foolish tale. But you and I, at all events, have known something of the terror that may dwell in the secret place of life, manifested under human flesh, that which is without form taking to itself a form. Oh, Austin, how can it be? How is it that the very sunlight does not turn to blackness before this thing, the hard earth melt and boil beneath such a burden?
VA was pacing up and down the room, and the beads of sweat stood out on his forehead. Austin sat silent for a while, but VA saw him make a sign upon his breast. I say again, VA, you will surely never enter such a house as that. You would never pass out alive.
Yes, Austin, I shall go out alive. I and Clark with me.
What do you mean? You would not dare.
Wait a minute. The air is very pleasant and fresh this morning. There is a breeze blowing, even through this dull street, and I thought I would take a walk. Piccadilly stretched before me, a clear, bright vista, and the sun flashed on the carriages on the quivering leaves in the park. It was a joyous morning, and men and women looked at the sky and smelled as they went about their work or their pleasure, and the wind blew as blithely as upon the meadows and the scented gorse. But somehow or other I got out of the bustle and the gaiety, and found myself walking slowly along a quiet, dull street, where there seemed to be no sunshine and no air, and where the few foot passengers loitered as they walked, and hung indecisively about corners and archways. I walked along, hardly knowing where I was going or what I did there, but feeling impelled, as one sometimes is, to explore still further, with a vague idea of reaching some unknown goal. Thus I forged up the street, noting the small traffic of the milk shop, and wondering at the incongruous medley of penny pipes, black tobacco, sweets, newspaper, and comic songs which here and there jostled one another in the short compass of a single window. I think it was a cold shudder that suddenly passed through me that first told me that I had found what I wanted. I looked up from the pavement, and where the red bricks of 200 years ago had crimed to black, where the windows had gathered to themselves the dust of winters innumerable, I saw what I required. But I think it was 5 minutes before I had steadied myself and could walk in and ask for it in a cool voice, with a calm face. I think there must even then have been a tremor in my words, for the old man who came out of the back parlor and fumbled slowly amongst his goods looked oddly at me as he tied the parcel. I paid what he asked and stood leaning by the counter with a strange reluctance to take up my goods and go. I asked about the business and learned that trade was bad and the profits cut down sadly. But then the street was not what it was before traffic had been diverted. But that was done 40 years ago, just before my father died, he said. I got away at last and walked along sharply. It was a dismal street indeed, and I was glad to return to the bustle and the noise. Would you like to see my purchase? Austin said nothing, but nodded his head slightly. He still looked white and sick. VA pulled out a drawer in the bamboo table and showed Austin a long coil of cord, hard and new, and at one end was a running noose. It is the best hempen cord, said VA, just as it used to be made for the old trade, the man told me, not an inch of jute from end to end. Austin set his teeth hard and stared at VA, growing whiter as he looked. You would not do it, he murmured at last. You would not have blood on your hands. My God, he exclaimed with sudden vehemence. You cannot mean this, VA, that you will make yourself a hangman. No, I shall offer a choice and leave Helen Vaughan alone with this cord in a locked room for 15 minutes. If when we go in it is not done, I shall call the nearest police. That is all. I must go now. I cannot stay here any longer. I cannot bear this. Good night. Good night, Austin. The door shut, but in a moment it was open again, and Austin stood white and ghastly in the entrance. I was forgetting, he said, that I too have something to tell. I have received a letter from Dr. Harding of Buenos Aires. He says that he attended Merrick for 3 weeks before his death. And what does he say? What carried him off in the prime of his life? It was not fever. No, it was not fever. According to the doctor, it was an utter collapse of the whole system, probably caused by some severe shock, but he states that the patient would tell him nothing, and that he was consequently at some disadvantage in treating the case. Is there anything more? Yes. Dr. Harding ended his letter by saying, I think this is all the information I can give you about your poor friend. He had not been long in Buenos Aires and knew scarcely anyone, with the exception of a person who did not bear the best of character, and has since left, a Mrs. Vaughan. 8. The Fragments. Amongst the papers of the well-known physician Dr. Robert Matheson of Ashley Street, Piccadilly, who died suddenly of a apoplectic seizure at the beginning of 1892, a leaf of manuscript paper was found, covered with pencil jottings. These notes were in Latin, much abbreviated, and had evidently been made in great haste. The MS was only deciphered with difficulty, and some words have up to the present time evaded all the efforts of the expert employment. The date, the 25th July, 1888, is written on the right-hand corner of the MS. The following is a translation of Dr. Matheson's manuscript. Whether science would benefit by these brief notes if they could be published, I do not know, but rather doubt. But certainly I shall never take the responsibility of publishing or divulging one word of what is here written, not only on account of my oath given freely to those two persons who were present, but also because the details are too abominable. It is probably that upon mature consideration, and after weighing the good and the evil, I shall one day destroy this paper, or at least leave it under seal to my friend D, trusting in his discretion to use it or to burn it, and as he may think fit. As was befitting, I did all that my knowledge suggested to make sure that I was suffering under no delusion. At first astounded, I could hardly think, but in a minute's time I was sure that my pulse was steady and regular, and that I was in my real and true senses. I then fixed my eyes quietly on what was before me. Though horror and revolting nausea rose up within me, and an odor of corruption choked my breath, I remained firm. I was then privileged or cursed, I dare not say which, to see that which was on the bed, lying there black like ink, transformed before my eyes. The skin and the flesh and the muscles and the bones and the firm structure of the human body that I had thought to be unchangeable and permanent as adamant began to melt and dissolve. I know that the body may be separated into its elements by some external agency, but I should have refused to believe what I saw. For here there was some internal force of which I knew nothing, that caused dissolution and change. Here too was all the work by which man had been made repeated before my eyes. I saw the form waver from sex to sex, dividing itself from itself and then again reuniting. Then I saw the body descend to the beast whence it descended, and that which was on the heights go down to the depths, even to the abyss of all beings. The principle of life which makes organisms always remained while the outward form changed. The light within the room had turned to blackness, not the darkness of night, in which objects are seen dimly, for I could see clearly and without difficulty, but it was the negation of light. Objects were presented to my eyes, if I may say so, without any medium, in such a manner that if there had been a prism in the room, I shall have seen no colors represented in it. I watched, and at last I saw nothing but a substance as jelly. Then the latter was ascended again. Here the MS is illegible. For one instance I saw a form, shaped in dimness before me, which I will not farther describe, but the symbol of this form may be seen in ancient sculptures and in paintings which survive beneath the lava, too foul to be spoken of. As a horrible and unspeakable shape, neither man nor beast was changed into human form. There came finally death. I who saw all this, not without great horror and loathing of soul, here write my name, declaring all that I have said on this paper to be true. Robert Matheson, medical doctor. Such, Raymond, is the story that which I know and what I have seen. The burden of it was too heavy for me to bear alone, and yet I could tell it to none but you. VA, who was with me at the last, knows nothing of that awful secret of the wood, of how what we both saw die lay upon the smooth, sweet turf amidst the summer flowers, half in sun and half in shadows, and holding the girl Rachel's hand, called and summoned those companions, enshaped in solid form upon the earth we tread upon. The horror which we can but hint at, which we can only name under a figure. I will not tell VA of this, nor of that resemblance, which struck me as with a blow upon my heart, when I saw the portrait which filled the cup of terror at the end. What this can mean I dare not guess. I know that what I saw perish was not Mary, and yet in the last agony Mary's eyes looked into mine. Whether there can be any one who can show the last link in this chain of awful mystery, I do not know. But if there be any who can do this, you, Raymond, are the man. Even if you know the secret, it rests with you to tell it or not as you please. I'm writing this letter to you immediately on my getting back to town. I have been in the country for the last few days. Perhaps you may be able to guess in which part. While the horror and wonder of London was at its height, for Miss Beaumont, as I have told you, was well known in society, I wrote to my friend Dr. Phillips, giving some brief outline or rather hint of what happened, and asked him to tell me the name of the village where the events he had related to me occurred. He gave me the name, as he said, with less hesitation, because Rachel's father and mother were dead, and the rest of the family had gone to a relative in the state of Washington 6 months before. The parents, he said, had undoubtedly died of grief and horror caused by the terrible death of their daughter, and what had gone before that death. On the evening of the day which I received Philip's letter, I was at Carmon, and standing beneath the moldering Roman walls, white with the winters of 1700 years, I looked over the meadow where once had stood the older temple of the god of the deeps, and saw a house gleaming in the sunlight. It was the house where Helen had lived. I stayed at Carmen for several days. The people of the place, I found, knew little and had guessed less. Those whom I spoke to on the matter seemed surprised that an antiquarian, as I professed myself to be, should trouble with a village tragedy of which they gave a very commonplace version, and as you may imagine, I told nothing of what I knew. Most of my time was spent in the great wood that rises just above the village and climbs the hillside and goes down to the river in the valley. Such another long, lovely valley, Raymond, as that on which we looked one summer night, walking to and fro before your house. For many an hour I strayed through the maze of the forest, turning now to right and now to left, pacing slowly down long alleys of undergrowth, shadowy and chill, even under the midday sun, and halting beneath great oaks, lying on the short turf of the clearing where the faint sweet scent of wild roses came to me on the wind, and mixed with the heavy perfume of the elder, whose mingled odor is like the odor of the room of the dead, a vapor of incense and corruption. I stood at the edges of the wood, gazing at all the pomp and procession of the foxgloves towering amidst the bracken and shining red in the broad sunshine, and beyond them into the deep thickets of close undergrowth, where springs boil up from the rock and nourish the water weeds, dank and evil. But in all my wanderings I avoided one part of the wood. It was not until yesterday that I climbed to the summit of the hill and stood upon the ancient Roman road that threads the highest ridge of the wood. Here they had walked, Helen and Rachel, along this quiet causeways upon the pavement of green turf, shut in on either side by high banks of red earth and tall hedges of shining beech. And here I followed in their steps, looking out now and again through partings in the boughs, and seeing on one side the sweep of the wood stretched far to right and left, and sinking into the broad level, and beyond, the yellow sea and the land over the sea. On the other side of was the valley and the river and hill following hill, as wave on wave, and wood and meadow, and cornfield, and white houses gleaming, and a great wall of mountain, and far blue peaks in the north. And so at last I came to the place. The track went up a gentle slope and widened out into an open space with a wall of thick undergrowth around it, and then, narrowing again, passed on into the distance of the faint blue mist of summer heat. And into this pleasant summer glade Rachel passed a girl and left it. Who shall say what? I did not stay long there. In a small town near Carmen, there's a museum contained for the most part Roman remains, which have been found in the neighborhood at various times. On the day after my arrival in Carmen, I walked over to the town in question and took the opportunity of inspecting the museum. After I had seen most of the sculptured stones, the coffins, rings, coins, and fragments of a tessellated pavement which the place contains, I was shown a small square pillar of white stone which had been recently discovered in the wood of which I had been speaking, and, as I found on inquiry, and the open space where the Roman road broadens out, on one side of the pillar was an inscription of which I took a note. Some of the letters have been defaced, but I do not think there can be any doubt as to those which I supply. The inscription is as follows: Devon nondinta, flavis in syllabos of propteranifta pius, quad civitistus bivmabra. To the great god Nodens, the god of the great deep or abyss, Flavius Senilis has erected this pillar on account of the marriage which he saw beneath the shade. The custodian of the museum informed me that local antiquaries were much puzzled, not by the inscription or by any difficulty in translating it, but as to the circumstances or rite to which allusion is made.
And now, my dear Clark, as to what you told me about Helen Vaughan, whom you say you saw die under circumstances of the utmost and almost incredible horror, I was interested in your account, but a good deal, nay, all of what you told me I knew already. I can understand the strange likeness you remarked in both the portrait and the actual face. You have seen Helen's mother. You remember that still summer night so many years ago when I talked to you of the world beyond the shadows and of the god Pan. You remember Mary? She was the mother of Helen Vaughan, who was born 9 months after that night.
Mary never recovered her reason. She lay as you saw her all the while upon her bed. And a few days after the child was born, she died. I fancy just at the last she knew me. I was standing by the bed, and the old look came into her eyes for a second, and then she shuddered and groaned and died. It was an ill work I did that night when you were present. I broke open the door of the house of life without knowing or caring what might pass forth or enter it. I recollect your telling me at the time, sharply enough, and rightly too in one sense, that I had ruined the reason of a human being by a foolish experiment based on an absurd theory. You did well to blame me, but my theory was not all absurdity. What I said Mary would see, she saw, but I forgot that no human eyes can look on such a sight with impunity. And I forgot, as I have just said, that when the house of life is thus thrown open, there may enter in that for which we have no name, and human flesh may become the veil of a horror one dare not express. I played with energies which I did not understand. You have seen the ending of it. Helen Vaughan did well to bind the cord about her neck and die, though the death was horrible. The blackened face, the hideous form upon the bed, changing and melting before your eyes, from woman to man, from man to beast, and from beast to worse than beast, all the strange horror that you witness surprises me but little. What you say the doctor whom you sent for saw and shuddered as I noticed long ago. I knew what I had done the moment the child was born, and when it was scarcely 5 years old I surprised it, not once or twice, but several times with a playmate. You may guess of what kind. It was for me a constant, an incarnate horror, and after a few years I felt I could bear it no more, and I sent Helen Vaughan away. You know now what frightened the boy in the wood. The rest of the strange story and all else that you tell me, as discovered by your friend, I have contrived to learn from time to time, almost to the last chapter, and now Helen is with her companions.
And so, the final word is spoken, though the echoes may linger where no light dares to reach. In the dark corners of the cosmos, some truths are better left buried. But if you've listened this far, perhaps you've already heard them calling. If the story stirred your imagination or your dread, leave a comment below. I'd love to know what you think. And if you wish to venture further into the abyss, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. The unknown is waiting.